Possibilities this week
in our one-on-one relationships
are abundant.
Some of the usual suspects:
needs fixing,
lack of trust.
But how?
Poor communication.
How do we build the skills,
lack of compromise,
and the courage
to feel seen by the other person?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth Be Told. I'm Reverend Ryan, and this month we are talking about relationships. And so this week we're focusing on the one-on-one relationships, you and me. So tonight we're going to explore challenges and possibilities that arise in these relationships. So why relationships? Why is this topic important? Is it even relevant or necessary? Well, the short answer is yes. And so in the book, Social Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, he writes that neuroscience has discovered that our brain's very design is sociable, inexorably drawn to an intimate brain-to-brain link up with another person. Literally, we are wired to connect. And so that link is like a double-edged sword, he says. Nourishing relationships have a beneficial impact on our health, while toxic ones can act like poison in our bodies. So we are literally hardwired for relationships. We need it in order to survive and to thrive. And yet there's this intense vulnerability in this venture. So this is where the importance of this conversation lies, of taking a closer look at our one-on-one relationships. And based on our connection to one another, it is less of a choice, but more of a responsibility to take a look at how we show up and how we allow others to show up in these relationships. So we don't have to look too much further than the internet or social media or our local bookstore to see stacks and stacks and stacks of information on how to navigate relationships. So what this tells me is two things. One, relationships are important, and two, relationships can be hard to navigate. So even though it is integral to our own survival, the application of being in a relationship with one another or with another person is not always easy. And so when I say relationship, I mean any sort of one-on-one interaction, whether it's a brief interaction, extended interaction, committed relationships, or just kind of the pass-by sort of relationships. And any place where like my stuff shows up against your stuff. That is relationships. And so I believe that now more than ever, we are called to take like a different vantage point when it comes to relationships. In order for us to have any chance of a sustainable life together, we have to begin to take responsibility for how we show up in each and every relationship that we encounter. Now, I would really love to be prescriptive and tell you exactly what you need to do and how you need to show up. But that's not how it works. First, we have to look at ourselves. What part do I play? What is mine to do in any of the interactions that I encounter in the world and in my life? What areas are calling for greater compassion for me? What areas do I need to be listening more, understanding more, being more open, being more aware of the needs of others? When I can begin to get curious about these questions and their answers, then I can begin to really nurture, bring this nurturing kind of idea to all my relationships. And I can begin to exercise responsibility for people. Not responsibility for people, but instead responsibility to people. Now notice, not for people, but to people. And notice the subtle difference in that idea, or those two ideas. When I begin to expand my own awareness of my own responsibility to people and how I show up, then I invite folks to be exactly as they are. And when I can do that, I can open this door to authenticity and vulnerability, which we talk about all the time. And this really creates the framework, that sturdy framework for connection and belonging. And this is what our world needs now. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, but now. And especially in the light of recent events, especially over the past few days, where there's been threats to safety, threats to human rights that seem to occur at every corner. These events do not happen in a vacuum. They affect us all, period. And so together we can truly begin to create something beautiful. A world where authenticity is the norm and connection and belonging are held in such high esteem that we will settle for nothing less. So I'm excited about our conversation tonight to bring to surface the challenges, so none of us feel like that we're alone in the challenges in relationships, and to shed light on the possibilities, which will empower us to create shifts in our own little sphere of influence. So sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told.
Take a look at some of the challenges that arise in our one-on-one relationships. Now, obviously, a romantic partnership is a one-on-one relationship, but we have one-on-one relationships in all areas of our lives, whether it's with, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor. It could be, a member from your community. It can be your letter carrier. All these things can be one-on-one relationships, and they all require certain elements in order to thrive. So some of the usual suspects, challenges to that relationship are like lack of trust, poor communication, lack of compromise, or none at all. It's really important in our one-on-one relationships to feel seen by the other person, to be able to express your wants, needs, desires, and to also be able to receive and be receptive to the other person's wants, needs, and desires. Conflict is a natural thing that arises, and it's actually in a solid, healthy relationship, a positive thing, because it helps really fortify that commitment and the desire to be there, as long as it's handled effectively, which is, where that communication comes in. We have to be able to communicate in healthy ways, be seen, and allow others to also be seen. Now, one thing that comes up, the Gottmans, John and Julie, they are the relationship gurus that have been doing this for 4 decades. The number one indicator to them that a relationship is doomed is contempt. As soon as they see one partner like holding the other in contempt, that is pretty much what they call the kiss of death for that relationship. There is still a chance, but if you see that coming in any of your relationships, it needs to quickly be addressed and use that conflict as a way to either solidify that commitment or really decide that it's time to part ways. Now, that's the challenges to the relationship itself, but now bigger challenges around the idea of when we start to lose those one-on-one relationships arise, and they can cause loneliness and isolation. And loneliness and isolation leads to decreased health. It can cause depression. Pretty much any health malady that exists, your chances of acquiring them go up greatly when you're in a state of isolation and loneliness. And these things can also lead to, addictive behaviors. That deeper depression can lead to anxiety, shyness, like more desire to just kind of retract and stay out of those relationships, which leads to lack of empathy and makes people less trusting of others and paranoia. So these things then kind of compound on each other, and they lead to more behaviors that then kind of also shut down more of those one-on-one personal relationships. So there's a lot of challenges here, but really there is hope once we become aware that that is our step forward. So let's find out what some of the possibilities are when it comes to one-on-one relationships.
Kind of fascinating.
just how many different angles there are to look at all of the things that can go wrong in a relationship.
Yeah, I had to narrow it down and just pick 3. You know, 'cause-
Right?
And it's never me. It's always the other person.
Well, obviously.
Yeah.
No, it's not true.
If everybody else would just step in line, this would be so much easier.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
No, but I like how you talked about, I mean, the communication, because I do think that is the crux of it, isn't it? I mean, I think in that is that, I hate to repeat myself. Actually, I don't really hate to repeat myself because I think it's important, is that in communication also is that authenticity, vulnerability piece. You know, when I feel safe enough to communicate my needs or to communicate whatever's going on, and the other person feels safe enough because we've created that to do the same, then there's less room for communication to be the downfall. I mean, it's always going to be a challenge, because I think the challenge is being able to create that space. But I think that the more we do that, I think that communication becomes this gentle exploration instead of this like wall that you keep on bumping up against, because we're not able to express ourselves in ways that we want to.
Well, and it almost becomes like communication becomes like the bottleneck for all of the other things, right? Because the piece that stuck out to me, and I don't think you said this directly, Chris, but something alluded to expectations. And, for me, expectations in relationships, that's been one that shows up readily, regularly, like just all over the place. Sprinkle expectations here and there.
A little there, a little here. Yeah. And it's usually expectations, how it shows up for me. I don't know about you, but where I have this like this thing that I haven't expressed, but I'm expecting someone to read my mind.
Yeah.
Know it.
And so even that gets funneled or not through that communication thing.
Yeah. Or expecting someone to meet this sort of external need or external sort of validation or something. It's like,
There was many years like that I spent living without realizing how important that communication piece is. And I've witnessed like myself, and I've witnessed other people in like, couples relationships, but then also just in like friendships or, coworker kind of friendships that, those expectations aren't expressed. And then all of a sudden it's not being met. And then rather than, like communicating that there's a need there that's not being met, it's just kind of like, well, that person, kind of sucks. So we're just going to kind of fade our way, get ghosted, and then that's it. And it just ends, and I'll go on to the next person, and I'm going to find that exact same problem again. Yeah. And I'm going to blame that other person again because they're not doing what I need them to do. Even though I've never expressed that.
And even, and I think, and I don't know, maybe this whole expectation thing is more common than I thought. And it's not just me, but
it's not just you.
I knew that to some degree, but we each have our thing, right? Yeah. But even like work relationships, right? Like I can think back on past work relationships where work, like the more like traditional kind of work can be really weird because there is an expectation that we all show up like cut off from any like personal opinion or feelings or whatever about work, and we're just there to do the work, and yet there are all these expectations amongst coworkers, amongst bosses, in the work environment, and people get so butthurt about things. But we're supposed to be cut off. The expectation is we're cut off, and so we're not supposed to express anything. And yet there's all these expectations of things that could have been avoided if we just had like open, normal conversation. It's crazy.
And I think too, we create these stories because that's what our brains love to do, is take information. And when there is gaps in the information, then our brain automatically, it's just a function of what it does, fills in those gaps, because our brain doesn't like ambiguity. It likes concreteness. And so we fill in these gaps, and then we begin to live from these gaps. And that shows up in relationships too. I mean, I think, we've even had opportunities where we've texted back and forth, and and something has been texted, and I was like, oh, I created a story, and I was like gone. I was like 2 miles before I stopped and said, wait a second. I think I'm reacting from a story, and let me get the missing information that I did. And it was every time, and not just, I mean, every time that I've done that, when I've acted from a story and stopped myself and said, wait, let me get clarity. And then I communicated, asked for clarity, it was never, like 100%, it was never the story that I created. And so what that tells me, especially importance in relationships, is that the importance of not taking the story and running with it. And really kind of like, because that's what we want to do, just take a breath, back up a little bit, and then ask the clarifying questions, ask the things that you need, and communicate that way. And that's not just in romantic, it's at all types of relationships.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of like the typical like text message thing. We don't really have this so much, but I've seen in other places where like you send a text message and the other person doesn't respond right away, and it's like, what? We were just texting, or we usually text at this time, or or whatever.
If they're not responding, I must have angered them. What did I say? Can you clarify? I'm sorry, I said that.
Yeah, and they just drop their phone in the toilet. I mean, just some like really crazy thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Or they're like busy or working or
right. Number of things.
Yeah. But it's amazing how wide the scope of challenges in any sort of one-on-one relationship.
Well, and I think that's why it's important to have these conversations about that, to realize, oh yeah, I do that. Oh wait, I'm not the only one. Yeah. Oh yeah, that really does impact relationships, and really begin to kind of dissect some of those challenges, and then upcoming the possibilities in those.
Mm-hmm.
We would like to take a quick break from the program to let you know a little bit about SEC. We're an intentional spiritual community with a vision of personal transformation and communal evolution, an authentic way of being, living, and viewing the world. Everything you could ever possibly want to know about this community and more can be found on our website at Soevolutioncollaborative.org. So come along for the adventure. Tuesdays we have Truth Be Told at 7 p.m. Eastern, which is what you're enjoying now. Thursday is The Gathering at 7 p.m. Eastern. This is a group experience where we take an even closer look at the topic for the week, how it shows up in our own personal lives, and the healing and transformative power of belonging and connection. On Sundays, we have Strip Down Sunday at 12:30, where we offer a streamlined approach to your Sunday morning experience through a short and sweet talk on our monthly theme. And now, the Second Sunday Experience, every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This is an evening experience that will demonstrate a new way of doing community. So be on the lookout for these events and so much more. If you can't already tell, we have a blast here at SEC. It is so much fun to explore these topics with you each and every week. It is our desire to not only share what we've learned, but to journey alongside each one of you as we navigate this adventure we call life. Our vision is to bring these teachings to everyday life in new and powerful ways. If you would like to support the vision of SCC and its continued evolution, we invite you to go to Soevolutioncollaborative.org and click on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible and serve to support this evolving ministry in its vision of personal transformation and communal evolution. And now, back to the show.
The possibilities this week are abundant. Looking at those me and you relationships, the one-on-one relationships, the ones between you and a partner, you and a family member, you and a friend, you and a work colleague, you and the list goes on. It becomes clear just how much of our time is taken up managing these kinds of relationships, or perhaps how much time we avoid managing these relationships. We all have at least one relationship in our lives that needs fixing. But how? How do we build the skills and the courage to even attempt to address the kinds of things that interrupt our relationships with other individuals? Well, a quick Google search and you'd think we would all be masterful at this based on all of the advice, relationship life hack lists, and the top 10 tips for fixing, changing, and healing relationships. Pages of results that offer a wide range of advice, tips, tricks that go from super obvious to the absolutely bizarre. And most of these are geared towards the romantic relationships, which can be helpful, but let's not forget about the majority of the me and you kind of relationships that are not with a romantic partner. But let's give it a shot. Let's take a look at what one of these relationship life hack articles has to say. 15 long-term relationship hacks. 1. Make deciding a game instead of a chore. 2. Make chores a favor for each other instead of a chore. Talk about the good stuff first. Okay, well, we're definitely not going through all 15 of those. Cute, and ideas like this might certainly help, but it can feel a little bit like avoiding the actual issue. A little bit like trying to heal the symptoms instead of understanding the root of the problem. And honestly, this might be our biggest challenge. Which brings us back to the things that we talk about here all the time. Authenticity, vulnerability, curiosity, wholeness. These things are key in every relationship, which is not something that society teaches us yet. Surface level games and things can be fun and may even provide some necessary relief. They are certainly not a long-term solution. There is a time and a place for these kind of tricks, but in some cases, this can actually allow unaddressed, deeper issues to further fester. Often, the challenges that lie below the surface, things like trust, communication, balance, we have to look below the surface for the solutions. It is critical to do a little excavating, ideally together, in order to address the root cause of the issue. If you look a little deeper into that Google search from before, you can find some more relevant and helpful information. This Psychology Today article, for example, 6 steps to repairing your relationship. Stop a downward spiral before it's too late. 1. Reinvigorate your connection. Bring it back by spending time sharing. Ask each other questions that go beyond the mundane. 2. Stop relational patterns in their tracks. Stop the spiral before it starts. Each of you has to get a handle on your own negative emotions and figure out how to regain your own self-control and help your partner regain theirs. 3. Rediscover touch. Pretty much just as obvious as it sounds. You can check out the full article using this QR code if you're interested in reading more. You can see how these potential solutions offer a deeper interaction than the life hacks from before. Yet even here, we are left identifying and addressing the surface level experience. Even these possibilities have a time and a place. If we really want to address the infinite possibilities of healthy me and you one-on-one relationships, then we must take a look at the root of those relationships, that which plants, waters, and nurtures all of these relationships. We must address the essence of the relationship, which begins with the spirit of both individuals in the relationship. This is where spirituality and psychology tend to overlap. Psychologically, there are a few major beliefs that tend to interrupt our relationships. All of our relationships. Isolation, loneliness, fear of abandonment, betrayal. Most, dare I say, all people have experienced an event in their young life that informed them of what to believe about these few major beliefs. Our nature is to continue to reaffirm what to believe about whichever core belief is strongest for us, which means we attempt to keep looking outside of ourselves to see if what we believe is true. Will you keep reacting the same way to me? When we are attempting to address some of the relationship issues that seem bigger and more challenging, when we are attempting to address the real root of behavior in our relationships, these core beliefs are the place to look. We're talking about really doing the work. To be very transparent here, I think this is where most modern practices tend to oversimplify, saying things like, you can't love anyone else until you learn to love yourself. Well, yeah, kind of. There is some truth in this statement that you probably need a certain level of self-love in order to be able to maintain healthy relationships. However, you can't not be in relationship with anyone else until you have it all figured out. You can't isolate yourself and practice being in relationship at the same time. And this is the piece that I think is skipped most often in these kind of new age conversations. Being in relationships takes both people. Sounds super obvious, right? So we have these two extreme opposites. We either avoid the real issue completely, applying band-aids and not taking any responsibility, or we are taught to take all of the responsibility, believing I can't love this other person until I love myself, so all of the work must be mine to do. Neither of these are healthy or accurate or helpful. The greatest possibility this week lies in the potential of both people in the relationship having a willingness and an openness to looking at the relationship they have with themselves, everything we discussed in the last episode, and taking responsibility for how those parts of them show up in this relationship together. No judgment, no animosity, no shame, no blame. Just a willingness to be vulnerable enough to share with the other person. Like literally saying, these are the beliefs I've held onto, probably without knowing it. These are the things I'm projecting and looking to grow through. Are you willing to help me do that? It takes a certain willingness to take down our defenses in order to be in relationship. It requires a vulnerability to allow the other person into that space with you. Certainly, the degree to which we do this depends on the relationship type, our level of comfort with our own stuff, and many other variables, but the principles are the same. It also requires a certain amount of vigilance and honoring of that space for the other person in the relationship. Relationships can be complex, and there is definitely no magic bullet to fix it all. The only way is to try it, like a playground for personal and spiritual growth. We are each showing each other something greater about ourselves.
I like that you address that idea of, you can't love somebody else unless you love yourself first. Because, I mean, that's a good point. I've seen where that's coming from, but honestly, it's kind of a bunch of bogus because, we do our best and it's a process and we're learning and growing. And
well, isn't that how we learn to love ourselves sometimes?
Right. Yeah. I bought into that for years. Yeah. It was preached so hard, was like, you have to do all of your self-work, the self-love, the self-worth, the self-whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you won't be able to love anybody until you do all of that.
That sounds like a recipe for cave living.
Right. But it also, it implies that there is some finish line. Like there is an end point where you've done enough work, you are now complete. Yeah. Congratulations, you've passed this course, you've done all the personal work there is to do, you love yourself. Here's a certificate. Go get them.
Go love somebody else now.
Yeah, right. You passed the test. You've got the T-shirt. I love that you talked about. We talk a lot about authenticity and vulnerability and all that stuff, but I think that there's like the prequel to that is willingness. That sneaky little thing but I think that's the prequel to all of that, and the willingness. And sometimes, honestly, I have to be willing to be willing to be willing. Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
But being willing to try and get it wrong, to be willing to say something, get it wrong. And that's how we learn. That's how we not only learn to build this connection with other people, but we learn about ourselves as well. And through that willingness. Yeah, I liked all of the stuff that you talked about. And it is not a quick fix. If it was a quick fix, then we'd all be fixed.
Yeah, we would have only needed one top 10 list of quick fixes. Right?
Well, and if relationships were easy, or if there was like a quick thing, we would have done it by now, but it's not. It's a process. It's a growing process.
Yeah.
Because our relationships with ourselves change day by day by day because we change.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that relationship with other people, it's going to be the same thing. This kind of growing, kind of like fluid experience that begins with willingness.
Well, and it goes back to the communication thing from just a few minutes ago, right? Like, we can be as willing as we want, but if we don't have a space, if there's not an attempt at an equal willingness from both people in any one-on-one relationship, if there's not at least an attempt at willingness from both people, that one person can try and communicate as much as they want, but if the other person is not open to hearing it, or open to sharing, or open to be willing to share, and I think the big thing for me is it really is like the willingness to put down our guards. And I think that's the other aspect that goes along with, you can't love anybody until you love yourself, as if to say, part of loving yourself is doing away with healing all of your own wounds and armor and all of that. Those things don't actually go away. Right. Like, even if we heal them, whatever that looks like, whatever the most healed version of our own crap is, it's still integral to who we are. It's still a very deep part of our personal history.
Yeah, our relationship to it's just different.
Right, exactly. The relationship to it is different. And so those things still play a part. And like we were all just saying, the relationship is the playground it is the space where, like, I can't work on that without you. And you the same, right? And so it's such an interesting take. I know we've said this a lot, but it's like the last couple of months of taking this like next level, deeper look at these kind of things that tend to seem rudimentary. It's really fascinating. It's been fascinating for me to do that, to like take that next step lower, the next step deeper, and really like, what's really going on here? What do we really believe about this?
Well, and I even look at like the three of us, our relationship has been like an interesting playground of healing for not all of my, but for a lot of my relational scars and things of the past. It's been a very healing playground to be able to show up and say, oh man, I'm a mess today, and be able to have that space. And then it's like this really fun practice in authenticity. And then it kind of like, when you're able to show up that way, it really gives you the confidence to show up that way in other aspects. And that can only enhance everything. And so I think this has just been a really interesting petri dish of exploration of the healing that can happen in relationships, because the healing only happens, I think, in relationships.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Our part of our whole thing is the importance of community, and I think that's something that's gotten so overlooked. But I will say this: it's going to sound funny, but I mean it sincerely.
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 That's a great word.
Sincerely, you guys.
That's a new word.
Write that down. That's a good one. I didn't realize how much PTSD I had from past, like, professional relationships. And like, part of me is joking, like, because this really was like, oh wow, that doesn't happen here, but legitimately, like when you're in a space where it is safe and you can be authentic and vulnerable and out all that kind of stuff, like, I mean, I had a PTSD, like massive PTSD experience from like opening emails from past work experiences, like what emergency just blew up overnight that I'm going to have, like, there was like a whole feeling that when I was like, man, that took a bit to like work through, months to work through, even a little bit. Anyway.
I like the idea that just came up is, us working together and like the need for relationships to develop and integrate those, things that we learn. Like you can learn it all, but until you actually have to take it and apply it, it's just kind of floating up there and you never really get to it. But and really, it's a blessing to be able to have relationships, one-on-one, relationships with others, because as those have, for most people, as you get older and older, they kind of dwindle and fade generally, unless you're really proactive and intentional about it. And so, it's really a gift to be able to have that opportunity in that space, especially when you find somebody that's on the same track that has, similar intentions of growth and evolution.
Just realizing as we're kind of wrapping up here, the one thing we haven't mentioned is risk. There's a risk involved. There's a risk involved in like to get that reward in that relationship, to have somebody who you can share your deepest desires and deepest hurts and deepest experiences with. There's a risk involved in, it's usually stepwise. Most of us don't usually just jump right off, but even again, going back to the three of us, like there is a risk involved in, I think we pretty much, we've set expectations clear enough, but there is a risk in sharing those things. There's a risk of, all this about me now. Right? Please don't use it against me. But there is. And it's totally worth it when done. When what's the word? When done well, when done in a healthy manner, when done smartly, I don't know, whatever that word is, right? Like in those times, in the right times, it's worth it. Super worth it.
Well, we talked about, a playground, that you kind of need a playground to practice relationships. And so that's what we are. SCC is a playground to practice being in a relationship. And what better event than the Second Sunday Experience every Sunday at 7 p.m. Come join us in the playground that is Second Sunday and practice relationships, being in community with one another, having some fun, experiencing not only the spiritual principles, but actually how we can apply them in our everyday life. And then how we can create authenticity and vulnerability, belonging, and connection.